Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Brandon, and welcome back to Marotta Media. And Merry Christmas, everybody. This video will be released either on Christmas Eve or hell, possibly Christmas Day. But I hope you all have a fantastic holiday with your families. You get some good gifts, you watch some good Christmas movies, eat some good food, play some games, and just spend quality time with your loved ones. And today I'm going to do something that I've never done before. 2023 has given us a lot of good movies, and just in the last month there have been 3 movies that have come out that you could say are Christmas movies. And all of them could not be more different. And I wanted to talk about all of them, so I thought let's put them all in one video and make a triple Christmas review out of it. And the first movie that I will be reviewing is what I think will eventually become a holiday favorite, and that is Holdovers. The Holdovers is the latest movie to come to us from director Alexander Payne, who previously directed movies like Election, The Descendants, and Sideways. And personally, this is the first movie from him that I have seen. But in this movie, we follow the lead character named Paul Hunnam, played by Paul Giamatti, as he is forced to watch over a group of male students at a boarding school in New England over Christmas break. And the reason they stay at the school over break is because they have nowhere else to go for the holidays, and they are nicknamed the Holdovers by the school. But let me tell you, The Holdovers is easily one of my favorite movies of the year. I truly think that this is an absolutely brilliant movie, and as I said, I think this will become a holiday favorite for some people, and this is definitely a movie that I myself will absolutely be rewatching every Christmas for the rest of my life. So let's start with the obvious. The acting in this film is just absolutely superb all around. The lead actors are the central 3 characters played by Paul Giamatti, Divine Joy Randolph, and newcomer Dominic Sessa. And all 3 of them are truly nothing short of remarkable. Honestly, I could see all 3 of them getting Oscar buzz in a few months, but I think only 2 of them will get a nomination, those being Giamatti and Randolph. But each character is given their own backstory, and all of them are honestly pretty tragic. Paul doesn't really have anyone in his life, and the only love that he really has is his job, hence why he stays at the school all the time. Mary just recently lost her only son in the war. And Angus has been abandoned by his mother and her boyfriend for the holidays so they can go on some luxurious vacation. And it's all really sad, but it's also very sweet because each character doesn't have anybody to spend time with during the holidays, but they all get to know each other and understand each other's struggles, and that's something that they never would have done if they weren't in this situation. And I think that everybody can relate to at least one of them, and all of them truly just have phenomenal chemistry with one another, really. They play off of each other so well. Something else this movie captures really well is the aesthetic of the 70s. This movie takes place in 1970, and it just has this old school look and vibe. It really is captured very well. It almost feels like this movie could have been made over 50 years ago. And with the grainy look of this movie, you would think that it was shot on film, but it was actually shot digitally, and they added some kind of filter to give it that old school film vibe. And usually you would be able to tell when a movie is shot on film with a filter added, but it's pulled off so well here, and I really thought that this was shot on film. The production design and locations are just amazing. All of the locations are these authentic, real places. They aren't sets, they aren't sound stages, they shot on location. And I also think that really helps sell the world of this movie and making it feel alive and not just some isolated soundstage. This movie is also very funny. It's not like laugh out loud hilarious, but the humor is very sweet and endearing. But there were quite a few times where I did laugh very hard. And this movie takes place during Christmas, so I guess in a way this can be categorized as a Christmas movie. I mean, hell, I'm counting it as one. And even though the story can be very sad and tragic at times, it still gives you that warm, Christmassy feeling that you would want from a movie like this. In terms of things that I didn't quite like about The Holdovers, I don't think the plot was necessarily anything new. It's not super innovative, and it can be a little bit predictable in parts. And there are some times where a character will mention something about themselves, and I found that thing that they mentioned to be very interesting, and I wanted to know more about it, but It's only brought up once and then never again. Particularly a scene in the third act where Paul is explaining to Angus this incident that he had in school when he was a kid. I was like, that's really good characterization. I want to know more about that, but we never find out any more than that. But that's all the negatives that I really have to say about this movie. I absolutely adore The Holdovers. And as I said, this is going to be a movie that I will absolutely be rewatching every Christmas from this point forward. And overall, I would give The Holdovers a 9 out of 10. And the next movie up in my triple Christmas review is John Woo's Silent Night. In Silent Night, we follow a man named Brian whose son was tragically murdered by a street gang in a drive-by shooting on Christmas. And as a result of taking a bullet to the throat, Brian has lost his ability to speak and vows revenge on those who took his son from him. As I said, this is the latest movie to come from acclaimed action director John Woo. And I will be honest, this is only the second John Woo movie that I have seen, the first one being Mission Impossible 2. And if you saw my reviews of the Mission Impossible movies on TikTok, you will know that I absolutely despise Mission Impossible 2. God, that movie's awful. But I'm not familiar with the movies that he made in Hong Kong, which I hear are fantastic. Oh, and he made Face Off with Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, which people also say is like a cult classic. So I really didn't have a whole lot of expectations for Silent Night. At the very least, I was hoping that it would be better than Mission Impossible 2. I'm like, it can't be that hard, because Mission Impossible 2 is damn near unwatchable to me. But I was wrong, because not only is Silent Night much, much worse than Mission Impossible 2, Silent Night is one of the top 5 worst movies that I've seen all year. It really does suck to go into a movie with no expectations and you still feel let down. Easily the biggest problem with Silent Night is its ridiculously stupid no dialogue gimmick. Because as I said, Brian, played by Joel Kinnaman, loses his voice, so he's unable to speak. So it makes sense that he's not speaking, but literally every other character in this movie does not say a word. And logically, this makes absolutely no sense, because there were several scenes throughout this movie where I said, why is nobody talking? It makes no reasonable sense why nobody is saying at least one word in this moment. For example, when Brian and his wife get back home from the hospital after his recovery, he starts drinking some heavy liquor out of the fridge, and his wife is just sitting there staring at him, and she just throws her face in her hands and starts crying. Like, there's no attempt at a conversation. Like, I know she knows that he can't speak, but he's not deaf, he can understand her, so she could still talk to him. And there's another scene where Brian is kind of like boozing away his sorrows in the garage, and his wife is in the kitchen behind him. And just to make it make sense, there's a door leading to the garage from the kitchen, and she sees that he's in there, and you can tell that she wants to say something to him, but she doesn't go up to him and ask. Instead, she texts him when he is 10 feet in front of her. And she texts him something like, hey, have you seen my keys? I'm late for work. And I'm just sitting there in my seat dumbfounded. Like, woman, go talk to him. Because as I said, this man is not deaf. He's mute. He can't speak. He can hear you. Why aren't you talking? And in a few scenes where a character might say a few words, they just mumble. Like, there's a scene that takes place in a police station where all these cops are walking around and one of them hands the sheriff or the detective, played by Kid Cudi, a piece of paper. And legitimately, this is how he says something. He's like, I guess that's his way of saying thank you to a person that's, you know, like 2 feet from him, to just mumble under his breath to say thank you. The only dialogue that you really hear is chatter on the radio or the police scanner. That's it. There's no real discernible dialogue from any of the characters. The editing is also just really bad and also kind of funny. It has these transitions that it thinks look so cool, but in reality, they're just ridiculous and they come off very funny. And forgive me, it's been a while since I've seen the movie. It's been a few weeks, but I think it was Brian's wife who's crying, and you see a tear fall off her face, and it cuts to a bullet hitting the ground. And I really did laugh out loud in this moment. I was like, what the hell was that? What kind of transition was that? And I think it was also regarding Brian's wife. There's this random zoom in and freeze frame on her eyes. There's a freeze frame on somebody's eyes, but it was just so dumb and jarring, and you're wondering what was the point of that? And toward the final fight, there's this, like, supposed one-take fight scene that takes place on a staircase. But it's not a one-take, because there are several cuts hidden throughout the entire thing, but they are so poorly hidden. They should have done a better job hiding them, or actually shot the whole thing in one take, because it would have looked pretty cool. And there's also just these random cuts to so many flashbacks with Brian and his son, just showing him and his son's relationship, them playing together and doing things together. And honestly, eventually it got to a point where it became a little bit tedious. Like, we understand he's a father. He loved his son. We get it. You don't need to constantly beat us over the head with it. Silent Night is also extremely tonally uneven. This movie takes itself so seriously, but as I mentioned a few times already, there are quite a few moments that come off as funny, but you could tell they were meant to be so serious. For example, there's one scene where Brian, I think, is going into like a hardware store or something, and he sees his son running towards the door, and his son stops and looks at him, and Brian is like looking at him in awe, like, oh my god, son, you're alive, and he hugs him. But as you guessed, it wasn't his son. It was just some other random little boy. And the mother comes and she's like, oh my god, son, no, don't hug this random man. You don't know him. And she goes into the hardware store like nothing happened. Wouldn't you be a little bit more alarmed if a strange man was caught hugging your son outside of a store? Like, wouldn't you call the police, or at the very least intervene, yell at him or something? Instead, you just choose to forget it happened and go into the hardware store? Like, all right, it's Mother of the Year right there. And the pacing is so excruciatingly slow. It takes forever before something happens, and the payoff is not worth it. And on top of that, Brian is just not a character that you are able to root for at all. In fact, he's kind of a terrible person. I don't understand how this movie thought that the audience would be able to cheer for him. And this next point I'm about to make, I can somewhat sympathize with because he's a father who lost his son. I can't imagine what that pain is like. But afterwards, when he and his wife are trying to move on, he just treats his wife like shit. He completely neglects her and just ignores her altogether in pursuit of revenge. And on top of that, his solution to all of this just seems so hypocritical. Because throughout the movie, he's kind of seeing how his neighborhood is changing for the worse, and all these gangs are taking over, and there's all this violence in the street, and he wants to put an end to it. So his solution to avenging his son and putting an end to the violence in his streets is by becoming part of the problem. He himself commits numerous acts of violence in these same streets. I don't understand how anyone would be able to root for this guy. He's just a horrible person. And as I said, the payoff when we get past all that slow pacing isn't worth it because the action is so boring and underwhelming. Like I said, I truly did not expect anything from Silent Night, but I also didn't expect this to be one of the worst movies of 2023, but here we are. This year's been full of surprises. And overall, I would give Silent Night a 1 out of 10. And finally, the last movie that I will be reviewing in this video is the horror slasher It's a Wonderful Knife. In It's a Wonderful Knife, we follow the main character, Winnie, who witnesses a few murders in her hometown on Christmas Eve. And incidentally, Winnie stops the killer herself, but a year later, she's having trouble moving on. And soon after, Winnie is transported into another dimension where she never existed, and the murderer is still at large, and more people in her hometown have died. So obviously, this is a horror slasher take on the classic Christmas film It's a Wonderful Life, which is one of my personal favorites. And to be honest with you, I actually think this is a really good idea. You take a story from a classic Christmas movie and turn it into something entirely new while also keeping the roots of the original story. But I'm sure to no one's surprise by that title, It's a Wonderful Knife is also a very, very bad movie, but it's a lot better than Silent Night, I will give it that. For starters, this movie has one of the most cheap and amateurish looks than any movie that I have seen this year. And I guess I can't really be surprised by that because this is a Shudder original, and a lot of the movies I've seen on Shudder look very, very cheap. But this movie looks especially cheap. It kind of looks like one of those horrible Hallmark Christmas movies, and they attempted to make a slasher. It's also amateurish when I'm talking about the acting as well, because the acting in this movie is just awful. I really don't think there's any good performances in this entire thing. The acting performances range from bad to terrible. And there's not really any recognizable faces in the movie either. The only two people that I knew of are Justin Long and Joel McHale. Justin Long basically plays this movie's antagonist, and I'm sorry, but he just looks so ridiculous. And the movie mentions this and makes fun of it, how dumb he looks, but he looks really dumb. He has these veneers in his mouth that make him look like he has these big, fake-looking, perfectly white teeth, and it just looks awful. He also has a really terrible spray tan, and as I said, someone in the movie even mentions this spray tan and how bad it looks, but that doesn't make it okay, because honestly, I found it so distracting. I'm like, this is the same dude that was in Dodgeball. Second video in a row where I've mentioned Dodgeball. How about that? But another problem I have is that the main character, Winnie, is kind of a very selfish person. Because much like Brian from Silent Night, I can somewhat sympathize with her situation because what she went through is terrible. She witnesses the murder of her best friend and several other people she goes to school with right in front of her. So I could definitely understand why she would have a hard time moving on with her life, but she feels the need to drag others down with her. Because a year after the events occur, everybody else seems to have moved on or tried to, and she's mad about that. And I'm like, woman, why are you mad? People can't dwell on the past forever. I understand what you went through was difficult, but you need to move on eventually. And if you can't move on, that's okay. You should probably go see someone, but don't try to drag others down with you. And also, like Brian from Silent Night, it made her a very difficult character to like. Really, why is she mad about people just living their life and moving on? And this movie is also missing just the most important pieces when it comes to making a good, memorable slasher movie. A good slasher movie should have entertaining and creative kills, and It's a Wonderful Knife doesn't have that. In fact, the kills are kind of forgettable and very underwhelming. Seriously, no one in this movie dies in a unique way. It's all very generic. And another making of a great slasher movie is having the killer have a very memorable costume. Because the costumes of killers in other movies stand out in our minds, like Jason from Friday the 13th, Ghostface from Scream, Michael Myers from Halloween. And hell, I would put John Carver from Thanksgiving, which came out last month, in that same category. Definitely not on the level of the previous three that I mentioned, but I think that that character has a very memorable costume and look. And I think people will remember that costume as well as the kills in that movie far down the line. But the killer's costume in It's a Wonderful Knife is just so bland and boring. It's just white. It's just like a white cloak and this barren, glossy white mask. There's nothing that stands out about it. And when someone is killed, the CGI blood just looks so bad. It almost looks like an After Effects preset. And since this movie is a different take on It's a Wonderful Life, it does come with its fair share of references to It's a Wonderful Life, but they just come off as extremely cringy and unnecessary. Meta humor and self-aware jokes do not save you from the rest of your movie being terrible. And one of my last issues is that it's never really made clear why Winnie travels back in time in the first place. If I remember correctly, I think she just made a wish when she saw the Aurora Borealis and then boom, somehow she's in another dimension. I mean, if they wanted to stay true to the original story, wouldn't it have made sense to send like an angel or something? Or was that too derivative of the original movie? Either way, I think that would have been better and actually made for some pretty humorous moments if they had an angel following her the entire time while people were being killed around them. But in the end, this movie was really bad. I thought it had a great idea, and this could have been a lot of fun, but it wasn't. It was really, really bad. And overall, I would give It's a Wonderful Knife a 3 out of 10. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching my triple Christmas review. If you guys saw any of these movies, The Holdovers, Silent Night, or It's a Wonderful Life, let me know what you thought about them. Hell, did you see all of them? And which one did you like best? Which one did you like least? If you guys like this review, be sure to hit that thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. If you guys want to see my previous reviews, I will link those right over here. Other than that, I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas. Have a great time, everyone. Stay safe, and I will see you all next week when I go over the best and worst movies of 2023.